The financial engine. How capital becomes participatory, continuous, and non-extractive. A housing system built on scarcity inevitably produces financial structures that reward scarcity. When homes are treated as investment vehicles first and shelter second, returns are driven by rising rents, asset appreciation, and the concentration of ownership. These outcomes do not require coordinated intent. They emerge from a system where value is tied to limited supply and increasing demand. Solving the crisis requires more than construction. It requires a financial logic where returns come from stability and participation, not from scarcity-driven pricing. The good news is that this logic already exists in pieces. Co-ops, CLTs, impact funds, ground leases, modular deployment, and DST to REIT structures already work. The task is assembling them into a single, continuous engine. When aligned, they form a parallel housing market that grows by strengthening communities instead of extracting from them. This engine has three layers: access, participation, and continuity. Access, opening the door without speculation. The biggest barrier to housing development isn't construction, it's access. Land is expensive, financing is restrictive, zoning is confusing, and most people assume development is something only corporations can do. But under California's state laws, thousands of ordinary and underutilized parcels, especially deep lots or uneven terrain, oversized yards, and single-family zoned parcels, are already eligible for more housing. What people lack is the pathway. Guerrilla housing solves this by activating overlooked forms of land access that don't rely on speculation or ownership transfer. Together, ground leases, co-ops, community land trusts, or CLTs, and SB 9, SB 1123 form the access layer. They open the door for homeowners, residents, and small investors to participate without feeding speculation. Long-term ground leases, the quiet market. A vast supply of underused land sits behind everyday homes across California. Aging homeowners want income and stability, not debt or landlord obligations, or navigating the intricacies of development. Ground leases turn this into a shared benefit. Homeowners contribute land. We install accessory housing at no cost to them. New tenants gain stable homes. Investors gain predictable returns. By separating land from buildings, housing can be added without purchasing land up front, the single biggest barrier to development. When paired with modular construction, these homes can also be relocated, upgraded, and reused over time, reducing risk and extending asset life. Ground leasing transforms backyards and underutilized parcels into a distributed, flexible housing platform. The landowner retains ownership of the land, the housing structure is financed and operated separately, and revenue is shared through a long-term lease arrangement that avoids the cost of land acquisition. Co-ops and CLTs, ownership without speculation. Limited equity cooperatives cap resale value and give residents direct control. CLTs go further by removing land from the speculative market entirely. Both models deliver the same outcomes: long-term affordability, lower displacement, and stable operations backed by resident governance. These systems work because they do not rely on turnover or appreciation to remain financially sound. They rely on the stability residents produce. SB 9 and SB 1123, small lot ownership, starter homes return. This section is especially compelling in a for-sale development model. California's small lot reforms allow traditional single-family parcels to split and support modest, human-scaled homes that restore a missing rung on the ownership ladder. Paired with modular construction, SB 9, SB 1123 offers a faster, more accessible path to first-time buyers who have been priced out by conventional down payments and inflated home values. These units do not need luxury finishes or speculative price growth to pencil. They work because they are right-sized, attainable, and built for entry-level ownership. Participation. Reward stability, not extraction. Once access is established, the question becomes, what kind of capital keeps the system stable? For decades, the real estate industry pretended the answer was the market, speculation, rising rents, rising scarcity, the financial alchemy of making shelter cost more every year. But the truth is embarrassingly simple. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. All real housing value comes from two forces. 1. Residents who generate continuous, recursive cash flow every single month. 2. Developers or landlords who contribute the physical structure that shelters them. That's it. Not Wall Street, not land scarcity narratives, not engineered appreciation, just people paying to live and people building the places they live in. Everything else is noise. These two groups are not adversaries, they are co-creators of the system's entire economic engine. One brings the ongoing value, the other brings the initial value. Two halves of the same machine. Two sides of the same coin. Without either, nothing exists. This inevitable realization is both obvious and radical. Tenants don't consume value, they produce it. Landlords don't extract value, they contribute the asset that makes value possible. When we align these roles instead of pitting them against each other, housing stops being a battlefield and becomes a cooperative system, one that can finally generate stability, affordability, and long-term health. When residents have security and a meaningful stake in the outcome, performance improves across the entire asset. Turnover declines, maintenance stabilizes, and income becomes more predictable. These are not moral benefits, they are operational ones. This is the shift, treating tenants and capital not as adversaries but as interdependent contributors to the same system. When aligned, housing stops extracting value from instability and begins generating value from permanence. Non-extractive capital. Shareholder value has become a dirty word, and in this context it refers to an imbalance between the cash flow producers and property contributors described above. The problem is not return itself, but how return is generated and who bears the risk. When financial upside is decoupled from housing outcomes, displacement becomes a feature rather than a failure. Non-extractive capital corrects this misalignment by earning reasonable returns without relying on displacement or speculative appreciation. In practice, it functions like impact investing, prioritizing long-term affordability, community stability, and environmental performance over volatility. These investments target steady, predictable cash flows. When residents are stable, buildings perform better, defaults fall, maintenance improves, and turnover costs shrink. Financial success emerges because residents thrive, not despite it. Tenant-centered performance. When residents have security, agency, and a stake, through co-op shares, fractional equity, or ownership pathways, they strengthen the housing asset as mutual beneficiaries. Tenants may be able to opt into small, clearly defined maintenance tasks. Think gardening, tidying shared spaces, minor upkeep, maintaining their own unit. In exchange for a small kickback or credit, these are not obligations, they are empowerment roles. If we successfully execute this model, turnover falls, maintenance improves, and income stabilizes. These aren't moral benefits, they're operational ones. Participation capital is the center of the engine. It turns tenants into partners who generate the very stability investors rely on. Continuity. Turning returns into permanence. Access brings people in, participation gives them a stake, but the system only becomes transformative when capital recirculates. This is where guerrilla housing moves from projects to a self-reinforcing parallel market. Revolving funds and the power of recirculation. To turn this logic into a system rather than isolated outcomes, capital has to circulate instead of draining away. Revolving funds do exactly that. Excess cash flow from completed projects becomes seed capital for new ones. Instead of profits escaping to distant shareholders, they are redeployed to finance additional homes. In community development finance, revolving funds routinely generate 5-8x reuse of the original capital over a decade, proof that reinvestment reliably compounds capacity. DST to REIT pathways as scalable on-ramps. The DST to REIT pathway extends this reinvestment logic for mission-aligned investors. A Delaware Statutory Trust, or DST, allows investors to defer taxes while supporting income-producing real estate. When structured around affordability and reinvestment, an extraction-light model, DSTs become a familiar, low-friction entry point for mainstream capital seeking long-term, dependable returns. A later conversion into a REIT creates a diversified, community benefit portfolio that can scale without drifting into speculation. This step matters. The REIT structure locks in rules about distribution, transparency, and reinvestment, ensuring that power spreads rather than concentrates. The parallel market, a new housing economy, co-ops, CLTs, impact funds, and mission-aligned real estate vehicles already demonstrate aspects of this approach across the country. But assembled together, these tools form something larger, the financial architecture of a parallel housing market, a system that grows by reinvesting in communities instead of removing value from them. In the traditional market, scarcity is rewarded. In the parallel market, participation is rewarded. In the traditional market, capital is extracted. In the parallel market, capital recirculates. In the traditional market, stability is undervalued. In the parallel market, stability is the asset class. The future of housing finance is not extraction. It is continuity, participation, and shared abundance, an economy designed to strengthen the people who live within it.